All right, what are we working on today, Thomas?
Well, today we are going to be soldering some cable. I'm going to show you how to do it. All right, so for this process, we're going to have a couple of tools that we will use very consistently. I'll walk you through them here. We've got some wire snippers. We've got some very specific gauge wire strippers, a set of wire strippers that you can kind of adjust the level on, needle nose pliers, some rosin flux paste, some actual solder, a set of helping hands to hold wire for us, and our soldering iron. All right, so soldering cables typically have about 3 steps, and this is going to be our step 1, in which we are going to strip the outer jacket and strip the inner wires. So this is going to be our final product, and I'll show you how to do it. So for this first step of stripping the jacket, we're going to use a wire stripper here. This is going to go deep enough to get the cut through without cutting into any of the wires internally. And that's going to give us an internal core that's got this little insulation, which we'll cut back, your shielding wires, and then an additional shielding that's going to have your inner wires there, and we'll cut that back in just a moment. So first, I like to take care of this little insulation, and I just like to trim it back as close as I can to the jacket, and then just discard it to the side. That inner shielding wire, I typically like to twist it together to where it's nice and clean and kind of acts as one wire unit. And then this inner insulation shielding sometimes peels back really easy, sometimes it's a little more difficult. We'll see what it does today though. You get that off, discard it. You got your inner wires there. So take some different wire strippers for smaller gauge wire. And there you have it. All right, so step 2 is going to be prepping our wire for the actual soldering joints. So to start that, we're going to put a little bit of rosin flux paste on the ends of the wires themselves, as well as the end of the terminal connections. And then we're going to tin the wiring connections with a little bit of solder to get things started. So usually with something like this, I'll just stick each pin or each wire just right in the flux paste, just to where there's a little bit on the tip there. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy. And the flux is going to help remove oxidized metal and keep any additional air out, as well as kind of give a little bit of a better adherence for the solder itself. So you just put a little bit on. These joints have been soldered once before, so they don't really need much of anything. I just used a little piece of solder as a tool to kind of spread that flux on those joints, make it a little bit easier. And that is step 2. All right, now we're going to move to step 3, which is making our actual soldering connections. So the tools that we will use right now at this step is going to be our helping hand to kind of keep our wire in place where it needs to go. We use some needle nose pliers to kind of help if anything's a little unmanageable or a little difficult. And then we're also going to have our soldering iron, which we've got set to 550 degrees Fahrenheit, or roughly 290 Celsius. That's going to be an adequate temperature to melt the solder without melting our actual connector pieces or any additional plastic on the connector pieces themselves. So to get started, I like to just kind of line things up as close as I can to where everything's nice and good. We're going to be starting with our ground on this left side here. So I'll use my needle nose pliers and kind of position it a little bit closer into shape. I've got a little bit of solder on both the tip and the connector, so I shouldn't have to do too much extra to get this going. We're going to move the extra wires out of the way for this moment so that we can reach that soldering joint. And for this style connector, we're going to heat from the underside. Take a little longer. Just let that slide into place there. Try to keep your wire as still as possible so that you can get a good soldering joint. And we will move on to that next one. And that's it. So after you finish with your soldering connections, be sure to wipe your soldering iron off on a damp sponge to clean any of that extra solder residue off. That way you can make sure to preserve the life of your soldering tip and keep everything clean and efficient. All right, make sure you go to our website and YouTube channel to check out any other tech tips and tricks for the live production realm. We'll see you next time.